Are you ready to uncover one of the greatest archaeological enigmas of all time? Tonight, I invite you to step into the ancient sands of Egypt to a tale buried beneath layers of history and myth. Let's begin with a discovery that shook the foundations of Egyptology, the tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun. It all happened in 1922, a year etched in the timeline of historical marvels. British archaeologist Howard Carter, driven by relentless determination, unearthed a royal tomb that had remained sealed and largely untouched for over 3,000 years. And it was almost by chance. During the New Kingdom period of Egypt, roughly between the 16th and 11th centuries BCE, the Egyptian capital had shifted southward to a city known in Greek as Thebes. The ancient Egyptians called it Wazit. This era marked a distinct chapter in Egypt's past, beginning with the reconquest of the Nile Valley by the kings of Upper Egypt, who ruled from Thebes. Before this resurgence, Egypt had fallen under the control of foreign rulers known as the Hyksos, invaders from the Middle East. These Hyksos gradually seized control starting from the Nile Delta during a period of political weakness. They overthrew native Egyptian dynasties and installed their own foreign rule. Their power base was strongest in Lower Egypt, the north, but they relied heavily on the allegiance of southern Egyptian nobles. These nobles paid taxes and tributes and were occasionally rewarded for their compliance. But rebellion simmered. In the 16th century BC, a revolt led by the rulers of Wazit ignited. Within a few years, the Hyksos were driven out and native Egyptians reclaimed the throne, establishing the 18th dynasty, one of the most illustrious in Egypt's long history. Some of Egypt's most iconic pharaohs belonged to this dynasty. They built grand temples, towering obelisks, and left behind timeless monuments, particularly in their capital, the city we now know as Luxor. This era marked Egypt's golden age. The kingdom flourished economically, expanded its borders southward and eastward, and boasted military strength and cultural sophistication. Though occasional unrest surfaced, Egypt remained largely unified and prosperous during this period, making the New Kingdom a focal point of Egyptian history. At the time, pharaohs ruled from Wazit and were laid to rest on the Nile's west bank, the direction of the setting sun, symbolizing the journey to the afterlife. The days of building massive pyramids for burial were long gone, but the tradition of entombing kings with lavish treasures and offerings endured. These items were believed to aid the pharaohs on their journey beyond death. Their tombs were hewn deep into the bedrock, forming a subterranean necropolis in the Valley of the Kings. The surrounding cliffs housed not only royal tombs but also simpler burial chambers for nobles and commoners. The entire West Bank became a hub for funerary art, filled with skilled artisans and craftsmen dedicated to carving and decorating tombs for the elite. Tutankhamun, a lesser-known pharaoh from the tail end of the 18th dynasty, was buried among these many tombs. Yet unlike most, his burial site would one day become the focus of global fascination. These tombs, glittering with wealth and hidden beneath stone, inevitably attracted the attention of grave robbers. Ancient looters often tunneled their way into tombs or rediscovered hidden entrances. It was a risky endeavor, but the rewards were immense. Even a mid-tier noble might be buried with golden relics, fine jewelry, precious stones, and ritualistic objects. The burial itself and even the mummified body held commercial value in later centuries. Amulets nestled within mummy wrappings were highly prized. This plundering of tombs began not centuries later, but almost immediately during Egypt's own ancient timeline. By the 1800s, when Egyptology emerged as a formal discipline, nearly all tombs had already been ransacked. Mummies were gone. Treasures vanished. Very little had survived untouched. But there were rare exceptions, moments when tombs had been overlooked by thieves. And Tutankhamun's was one of those anomalies. Or at least partially. His tomb had been broken into in antiquity and some items had indeed been taken. But remarkably, his sarcophagus, mummy, and many invaluable artifacts remained intact. For reasons still debated, the tomb was resealed shortly after the robbery and then forgotten. Centuries passed, and eventually structures were built over it, possibly shelters or huts for workers during the later New Kingdom era. This unexpected construction above the tomb may have protected it from further looting. When Carter began excavating the area, his team wasn't even searching for a royal tomb. They were exploring what they assumed to be workers' quarters. Then fate intervened. A young Egyptian water boy stumbled upon a buried step, the first sign of a hidden stairway carved into the bedrock. What lay beneath? Carter's team cautiously uncovered a few steps and soon revealed the top of a doorway, a sealed entrance hidden for millennia. Its location, buried beneath rubble and earth, hinted that no one had entered in thousands of years. Carter immediately sensed the magnitude of the find. He halted excavation and alerted his financial sponsor. Careful digging revealed intact seals bearing the name of a relatively obscure pharaoh, Tutankhamun. At the time, only scholars recognized the name, a boy king who ruled briefly and died young, leaving little historical impact. But what lay inside would change his legacy forever. As Carter's team proceeded, they uncovered a sloping corridor filled with rubble, a deliberate blockage used to seal the tomb. Signs of ancient intrusion were apparent, but as they reached a second doorway, also breached and reclosed, uncertainty lingered. Had looters stripped the tomb clean? Would there be anything left? Through a small hole in the second door, Carter peered inside. The flickering flame of his candle illuminated gold everywhere. Glinting statues, strange creatures, chariots, furniture, a treasure trove. It was a moment of wonder and disbelief. Despite prior entry by ancient hands, the main chamber remained packed with splendor. Unlike earlier expeditions that might have rushed inside and disturbed the contents, Carter's approach was methodical. Photography, cataloging, and meticulous removal began. This tomb, one of the few untouched by centuries of theft, would take years to fully document and excavate. And in doing so, it ignited not just academic excitement, but also something darker, more mysterious, tales of a curse that would haunt popular imagination for decades to come. But before we dive into those legends of doom, we need to understand the boy behind the mask, the enigmatic figure at the center of this tomb of wonders. The tomb of Tutankhamun stood as one of the very few relatively intact royal burials that survived the relentless march of time and looters. Despite evidence of ancient intrusions, it still held within it an astonishing quantity of artifacts, allowing us a rare and vivid glimpse into the life, death, and beliefs of an Egyptian pharaoh. Located in the famed Valley of the Kings, the tomb was nestled among the craggy hills of Egypt's western bank of the Nile, a place long believed to be the realm of the dead where the sun set and the afterlife began. This valley, carved from sun-baked stone, had once been alive with the quiet activity of laborers and artisans. Entire villages existed nearby, populated by skilled workers dedicated solely to constructing, painting, and sealing the final resting places of Egypt's rulers. Though Tutankhamun's tomb was far from the largest or most elaborate in the valley, its preservation made it the most famous. Inside, thousands of objects were uncovered, each one a piece of the young pharaoh's life, status, and identity. Yet the sheer number of royal and noble tombs in this region had always drawn the attention of thieves. It was simply too tempting. These tombs were often filled with gold, gemstones, sacred amulets, elaborate furniture, weapons, and finely crafted goods, all designed to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Tomb robbing became a near-institutionalized activity in ancient Egypt, sometimes occurring not decades or centuries later, but within years of burial. Grave robbers worked in dangerous conditions, navigating collapsed tunnels and braving curses, both real and imagined, for the promise of treasure beyond their wildest dreams. Many tombs were breached through newly dug tunnels or uncovered entrances. Once an organized state no longer protected them, they were vulnerable. And looters came in the shadows of empire during times of famine, rebellion, or political collapse. The more fragile Egypt became, the more tombs were plundered. Looters often stripped tombs of their valuables but left behind more cumbersome or less visibly precious items. In many cases, even mummies were unwrapped, their bandages rifled through in search of embedded jewels or charms. These practices continued for centuries, well into the Greco-Roman period and beyond. And by the time modern archaeology turned its eyes to Egypt in the 19th century, most of the country's ancient burial sites had been ravaged. Even the mummies were sometimes removed and sold as curiosities or, in an especially macabre practice, ground into powder believed to have medicinal value. So when Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb, mostly undisturbed and brimming with artifacts, it was nothing short of miraculous. However, close study revealed that the tomb had, in fact, been broken into twice during antiquity. Objects had been stolen and others hastily rearranged, as if someone had tried to mask the damage. Yet, curiously, the inner sanctum, the burial chamber that held the sarcophagus and the pharaoh's mummy, had been left untouched. The wooden shrines enclosing the sarcophagus stood sealed, and behind them, the golden coffin of the boy king lay undisturbed for over 3,000 years. Why did looters stop? Some believe they may have been interrupted. Others suggest the robbers couldn't penetrate deeper without considerable effort. Or perhaps they were content with what they had already taken from the outer chambers. Whatever the reason, the core of the tomb survived. It's possible that after the initial robbery, Egyptian authorities resealed the tomb and tried to conceal its location. Over time, construction work from nearby tombs or structures may have further hidden the entrance, unintentionally shielding it from further plunder. The tomb was likely forgotten, buried beneath layers of debris, stone, and human activity. For centuries, no one suspected that one of Egypt's last untouched royal tombs lay beneath their feet. As Carter and his team proceeded with their excavation in the 1920s, they encountered the remains of this long-forgotten protection. Rubble blocked their way, and centuries of accumulated earth needed to be cleared before they could make progress. With each step, the mystery deepened. Their patience paid off. Once inside, they entered a chamber now known as the antechamber. Here, dozens upon dozens of artifacts had been crammed into the space, wooden beds shaped like animals, chariots leaning against walls, chests overflowing with linens, and even food offerings sealed in jars, all arranged in a seemingly chaotic fashion. The likely result of ancient thieves and rushed reburials. The scene was eerie. It was as though the room had been abandoned in a hurry, like someone had tried to re-hide everything quickly. But it was also beautiful, a visual cacophony of sacred objects, gold leaf, carved wood, and divine symbols glowing in the dim torchlight. As Carter carefully documented each item, he realized that this first chamber was only the beginning. It had already been entered long ago, and some contents had been looted, but it was what lay beyond the sealed inner doors that truly stirred his imagination. There were two more rooms waiting to be opened, the burial chamber and another chamber soon dubbed the treasury. These rooms were tightly sealed, their entrances blocked and covered with symbols of magical protection. In the burial chamber, the sarcophagus was enclosed in multiple wooden shrines, each one larger than the last. They were like gilded boxes nested inside one another, forming a colossal shell around the body of the pharaoh. It was as if the Egyptians wanted to seal death itself. This multi-layered design served both a symbolic and practical function. Each shrine was decorated with scenes from sacred texts and spells from the Book of the Dead. The sarcophagus itself was carved from red quartzite, and within it lay 3 nested coffins, the innermost of solid gold. This kind of layered burial wasn't unique to Tutankhamun, but what made his tomb special was the state of preservation. The innermost coffins had never been touched. The room had been sealed with clay stamps of the royal necropolis. No footprints marked the dusty floor. No hands had disturbed the king's rest for millennia. As the team prepared to enter the burial chamber, a sense of reverence gripped everyone present. The door was carefully opened. The room inside glowed with golden warmth. Frescoes on the walls depicted the king's journey into the afterlife. Ritual boats, divine guardians, and symbols of resurrection surrounded him. There, at the center, stood the massive shrines. And within them, encased in layer upon layer of carved and gilded craftsmanship, lay the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun. But Carter didn't rush. This was not an Indiana Jones moment. It would take years, nearly a decade, to carefully document, photograph, and remove every item. Every discovery was recorded in meticulous detail. Objects were measured, sketched, and packed for preservation. Thanks to this methodical approach, thousands of treasures now sit preserved in museums, allowing generations to marvel at the wonders of ancient Egypt. But more than that, they gave historians unprecedented insight into royal burial practices, religious beliefs, craftsmanship, and daily life of the new kingdom. And through it all, one name, once obscure, became known around the world: Tutankhamun. The Boy King, the Pharaoh of Gold. The ruler whose forgotten tomb told a story louder than his life ever had. But the mystery wasn't finished. Because soon after the tomb's opening, something strange began to happen. People connected to the excavation began to fall ill and die. Whispers of a curse began to surface. Could it be that the Boy King's soul, or the gods themselves, were exacting revenge? Or was there something else, something natural, scientific, hiding behind the veil of myth? Before we dive into that chilling chapter, let's take a step back in time to understand who Tutankhamun really was and why his life and death were wrapped in so much mystery. To understand the significance of Tutankhamun's burial, we need to examine the strange and turbulent years that led to his brief reign. For while he may not have ruled long or made lasting reforms, his life was deeply entwined with one of the most radical episodes in ancient Egyptian history, a moment of religious upheaval, political chaos, and swift restoration. Tutankhamun, often referred to as King Tut, belonged to the legendary 18th dynasty, a family line that gave rise to some of Egypt's most powerful and iconic pharaohs. However, by the time he came to power, Egypt had just emerged from a controversial experiment in monotheism, one that nearly tore the empire apart. His presumed father, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, led that religious revolution. Akhenaten rejected the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods and promoted the worship of a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk. This radical shift upended centuries of spiritual practice. For generations, Egypt had worshipped a complex set of gods and goddesses, with Ammonius being the most prominent. The cult of Ammonius was not just religious, it was political and economic. Its priesthood wielded enormous influence and controlled vast temples, land, and wealth, especially in Thebes. When Akhenaten rose to power, he attempted to dismantle this system. He stripped the temple of Ammonius of its privileges, moved the royal court to a new capital called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, and focused religious attention entirely on the Aten. He even changed his name from Amenhotep, which means Ammonius is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. The reasons behind this dramatic change remain debated. Some scholars believe it was an ideological vision, a genuine belief in the Aten as the sole god. Others think it was a political maneuver to undercut the increasingly powerful priesthood of Ammonius. Perhaps it was both. What's clear is that Akhenaten's rule destabilized Egypt. The new religion did not resonate with the general population, and devotion to other gods continued in private. The economy suffered. Foreign affairs were neglected. Meanwhile, Akhenaten appeared increasingly isolated, depicted in art with elongated features and shown in family scenes worshipping the Aten in an almost surreal style that broke from traditional Egyptian conventions. When Akhenaten died, possibly suddenly, Egypt was in disarray. His religious reforms collapsed almost overnight. The Aten cult was abandoned. The old gods returned. The capital at Amarna was deserted. Into this vacuum stepped Tutankhamun, a child pharaoh, likely only 8 or 9 years old at the time. His rule marked the beginning of Egypt's return to traditional values. Early in his reign, he changed his name to Tutankhamun, re-establishing his connection to Ammonius. The court moved back to Thebes. Temples were reopened, and efforts were made to erase Akhenaten's memory. His name and images were defaced, his monuments dismantled. Tutankhamun's rule was short, likely around 9 years. And though his government restored order, he himself was probably a figurehead. Real power likely rested with his advisors, especially his vizier, a man named I's role in Tutankhamun's life and reign is unclear but appears significant. He may have been the boy king's grandfather or great-uncle. What's notable is that after Tutankhamun's death, I assumed the throne himself, a rare move for a non-royal. Tutankhamun died around age 18 or 19. The cause of his death remains a matter of speculation. For decades, it was assumed he had been murdered, perhaps for political reasons. But more recent studies of his mummy suggest otherwise. CT scans and DNA testing revealed that the young king suffered from multiple health problems. He had a clubbed left foot, forcing him to use canes, many of which were found in his tomb. He also had scoliosis, an abnormal curvature of the spine, and signs of malaria infections during his life. These findings paint a portrait of a fragile and sickly ruler. Far from the powerful warrior king depicted in hieroglyphs, Tutankhamun may have been physically vulnerable and politically insignificant, a puppet king in a time of national restoration. His unexpected death likely took the court by surprise. Pharaohs typically began preparing their tombs early in their reigns. Construction could take years, even decades. But in Tutankhamun's case, there's strong evidence his burial was hastily arranged. The tomb's layout is peculiar. It's smaller and simpler than other royal tombs from the same period. Only one chamber, the burial chamber, was decorated with wall paintings, while other rooms were left bare. This departure from custom suggests the site may have been originally intended for a noble or lower-ranking official and later repurposed for the young king. The artifacts buried with him, while stunning, are also somewhat inconsistent. Some items appear to have been made for others and re-engraved with Tutankhamun's name. His iconic golden death mask, for example, may have originally been crafted for a female, possibly his stepmother Nefertiti. The features of the mask are more feminine, and traces of erased inscriptions suggest it was modified. Additionally, some objects in the tomb bear the names of earlier rulers, hastily replaced or repurposed. The presence of such recycled items supports the idea that preparations were rushed, a scramble to ensure the young king received a burial befitting his status, even if his life hadn't fully lived up to royal ideals. Nonetheless, the tomb still followed essential religious customs. The process of mummification, burial rituals, and symbolic offerings were all observed. The walls of the burial chamber were painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead, guiding Tutankhamun's soul through the trials of the afterlife. Despite its modest size and inconsistencies, the tomb contained over 5,000 items, from ornate furniture and weapons to food, clothing, and musical instruments. Chariots, thrones, statues, and perfumes lined the rooms. The famous canopic chest held his internal organs, protected by goddesses carved in alabaster. And at the heart of it all lay the boy king himself, nestled within 3 golden coffins, surrounded by spells, amulets, and sacred relics designed to protect him for eternity. Ironically, what made his tomb so famous wasn't the man, but the fact that it remained largely undiscovered and intact. Far more powerful and accomplished pharaohs existed before and after him, but their tombs were looted or destroyed. Tutankhamun's obscurity became his blessing. He was forgotten by history for centuries, a minor ruler whose legacy was reborn the moment Carter peered through a hole and saw the glint of gold. In that instant, the world remembered him. Yet, amid the celebration and wonder, something darker began to seep into the story, a narrative that would haunt the excavation team and capture the imagination of millions, the supposed curse of the pharaoh. Within months of the tomb's opening, stories began to circulate. Strange deaths, accidents, and ominous events afflicted those connected to the discovery. Some said it was coincidence. Others believed a supernatural force had been unleashed. But was there really a curse? Were the deaths part of some divine punishment for disturbing the dead? Or was this simply the product of media sensationalism and public superstition? To answer that, we need to follow the trail of mysterious events and examine who lived, who died, and what science and myth have to say about one of history's most famous alleged curses. It didn't take long after the tomb's discovery for stories of misfortune and death to emerge. The most famous of these, the alleged curse of the pharaoh, gripped the imagination of the public almost immediately and has since become one of the most enduring legends in the world of archaeology. The first death occurred just months after the tomb was opened. Lord Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who had financed the excavation, died suddenly in April 1923. He had suffered a mosquito bite on his cheek, which became infected. The infection led to blood poisoning and pneumonia. He passed away in Cairo, and the press seized on the eerie coincidence. His death came less than 6 weeks after the tomb was unsealed. According to some reports, at the very moment he died, all the lights in Cairo mysteriously went out. Others claimed that back in England, his dog howled and dropped dead the same night. These details, largely unverified or exaggerated, were perfect fodder for newspapers looking to sell headlines. The British press, especially the tabloids, leapt at the story. Soon, whispers of an ancient curse spread through Europe and America. It was said that anyone who entered the tomb of Tutankhamun would suffer divine punishment, a wrath from beyond the grave for disturbing a pharaoh's eternal rest. The idea of cursed tombs wasn't entirely new. Even before Carter's expedition, Victorian-era writers and journalists had explored themes of ancient curses and mummies. Fictional stories featuring vengeful pharaohs or reanimated corpses had long captured the Western imagination, thanks in part to Gothic literature and the rise of spiritualism. But Carter's discovery gave these fantasies new fuel: a real tomb, a real mummy, and now a real death. More ominous still, additional people linked to the excavation began to suffer unfortunate fates. George J. Gould, a wealthy American businessman and son of a railroad tycoon, visited the tomb shortly after its opening. Not long after, he fell ill with a fever and died in the French Riviera. Then came the death of A.C. Mace, a member of Carter's core excavation team. He passed away in 1928 after years of declining health. That same year, Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary, died under mysterious circumstances in London, reportedly smothered in his sleep. Other incidents followed: the death of a radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, a cobra entering Carter's home and killing his pet bird, a cobra being the symbol of royalty in ancient Egypt, and several cases of illness, accidents, and general misfortune befalling those connected to the tomb. None of these events, taken individually, seemed particularly extraordinary. After all, many of those involved were older or in poor health. And Egypt in the 1920s was still a place where infections and tropical diseases were common. But together, they formed a pattern, or at least, the illusion of one. The media pounced. Articles ran with headlines like, "Death comes to the tomb robbers and Pharaoh's curse strikes again." Journalists began tallying the deaths, building a narrative of escalating vengeance. Even authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, weighed in, suggesting that ancient Egyptian priests may have created elemental spirits to guard the tombs. Carter himself, however, dismissed the rumors. A rational man with little patience for superstition, he considered the idea of a curse to be absurd. He pointed out that many people who entered the tomb had suffered no ill effects whatsoever. In fact, Carter lived until 1939, 17 years after the discovery, dying of cancer at the age of 64. Hardly the work of an immediate vengeful force. Still, the notion persisted. For every person who survived, another story would surface about someone who fell victim to mysterious forces. And perhaps more importantly, the public wanted to believe. After the horrors of World War I, society craved meaning, wonder, and the supernatural. The tomb of Tutankhamun offered all of that: a lost civilization, glittering treasure, and now whispers of a deadly curse. The idea of the curse was seductive because it played into deeper fears: the desecration of sacred spaces, the consequences of disturbing the dead, and the idea that some knowledge, some places, were never meant to be uncovered. But was there any truth to it? Statistically, the so-called curse falls apart under scrutiny. Of the dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people who were directly or indirectly involved with the tomb's discovery, only a small fraction suffered early or unusual deaths. Many lived full, healthy lives. Most of the Egyptian workers who helped excavate the tomb remained unaffected and unmentioned in the media narrative. The deaths that did occur can often be explained by natural causes. Lord Carnarvon's infected bite, while tragic, was not particularly rare in an age before antibiotics. George Gould's fever might have been the result of travel-related illness. Mace had been ill for years. Bethel's death, though suspicious, had no confirmed link to the tomb. Still, theories continued to emerge, some scientific, others speculative. One hypothesis suggested that the tomb, sealed for thousands of years, might have harbored dangerous mold or bacteria. When opened, these pathogens could have been released into the air, infecting those who entered. Indeed, studies in the 20th and 21st centuries have shown that certain ancient tombs do contain toxic molds like Aspergillus flavus and Stachybotrys char-arum. These can cause respiratory problems or allergic reactions, especially in individuals with weakened immune systems. But this theory also has weaknesses. If pathogens were the cause, why didn't more people fall ill? Many workers entered and exited the tomb repeatedly without incident. Carter himself spent years cataloging the site and showed no signs of infection or mysterious illness. Another theory posits psychological effects, the power of belief. The fear of a curse may have created a nocebo effect, where the expectation of harm can actually produce physical symptoms. People who believed they were cursed may have inadvertently worsened their own health through stress and anxiety. This too is plausible. After all, belief can shape experience. A person convinced they are doomed may behave differently, feel sick, or misinterpret ordinary symptoms as signs of something sinister. So perhaps the curse wasn't supernatural, but rather cultural and psychological. It was a story that emerged from the intersection of Western fascination with ancient Egypt, post-war trauma, and the birth of modern media sensationalism. In ancient Egyptian culture, curses did exist, but not in the way we imagine them today. Royal tombs rarely bore warnings or threats. Unlike modern horror tropes, Egyptian inscriptions didn't typically include promises of revenge or doom for those who entered. More often, texts called upon the gods to protect the dead or ensured the deceased's comfort in the afterlife. The concept of a curse was likely more of a protective invocation than a malevolent threat. And in most cases, such language was found not in royal tombs, but in the burials of priests or commoners, people who feared tomb robbing and hoped spiritual warnings would deter it. To the ancient Egyptians, desecration was unthinkable not because it would invoke wrath, but because it disrupted the soul's journey. Robbery broke the bond between the deceased and the divine, and that was punishment enough. So where did the modern idea of the mummy's curse come from? In truth, it evolved over centuries of fascination with Egypt. As early as the 1800s, European travelers and writers romanticized the land of the pharaohs. Mummies were paraded through salons, unwrapped at dinner parties, and dissected in front of curious audiences. They became symbols of the exotic, the ancient, and the mystical, but also of guilt. Even as Egypt was plundered for artifacts and relics shipped off to European museums, there was a lingering sense of wrongdoing. The curse was a story that made sense of that guilt. It said, if you disturb the dead, there will be consequences. By the time Carter made his discovery, the mummy's curse was already part of popular imagination. The tomb simply gave it a new, thrilling chapter. And while no true curse has ever been proven, the story remains not because it is factual, but because it is powerful. It taps into something primal in us: fear, awe, respect for the unknown. Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't just a gateway to the past, it was a mirror reflecting our deepest hopes and anxieties. And for that reason, the myth of the curse may live forever, even if the facts do not. To grasp why the story of Tutankhamun's tomb and the so-called curse captured the world's attention so profoundly, we must look beyond ancient Egypt. We must understand the cultural atmosphere of the 1920s, the decade during which the tomb was unearthed. The early 20th century was an era of profound transformation. Just a few years before the tomb's discovery, the First World War had ravaged Europe. It left in its wake more than 10 million dead, millions more wounded, and an entire generation traumatized. The grand ideals of progress, science, and human advancement, once the pride of the 19th century, lay shattered amid the ruins of trench warfare and chemical weapons. For many people, the 1920s were not just a time of rebuilding, but a time of searching. Searching for meaning, mystery, and magic. The optimism that had once driven the Industrial Revolution was replaced with disillusionment. Amid this cultural void, the world was ripe for a story that offered something ancient, mysterious, and transcendent. The discovery of an intact royal tomb in the Egyptian desert arrived at precisely the right moment. Here was something unspoiled by time, a chamber sealed for over 3,000 years, filled with gold, forgotten gods, and the whispered echoes of a vanished civilization. It offered a connection to something older and more enduring than the modern world, something that had survived wars, empires, and centuries of decay. The global press played a crucial role in shaping this narrative. Newspapers and magazines scrambled to cover each new revelation from the Valley of the Kings. Photographs of golden thrones, chariots, and the iconic burial mask of Tutankhamun filled front pages. Readers were mesmerized. For a generation battered by war and hardship, the tomb was not just a discovery, it was a dream come to life. Soon, the story took on a life of its own. The line between fact and fantasy blurred. The media didn't just report the events, they dramatized them, embellished them, turned them into serialized adventures. The archaeologists became characters. The artifacts became magical relics. And Tutankhamun, once a minor king, barely a footnote in history, became a legend. Even Carter, a methodical and rational man, found himself at the center of a global spectacle. His every move was watched. His writings were published. Offers for speaking tours and interviews flooded in. He became a reluctant celebrity, a man torn between scholarly duty and the public's insatiable appetite for wonder. Meanwhile, the tomb itself was being slowly, carefully excavated. Unlike earlier generations of treasure hunters, Carter and his team approached the task with scientific rigor. They documented everything, every item, every position, every crack in every wall. They took photographs before moving a single object. They cataloged the orientation of statues, the layering of fabrics, the types of wood used in furniture. This was archaeology as it was meant to be: slow, patient, meticulous. And because of it, we now have one of the most complete records of an Egyptian tomb ever discovered. The excavation lasted years. It wasn't until 1930, 8 years after the initial discovery, that the final artifacts were removed. Even the unwrapping of Tutankhamun's mummy was delayed until 1925, 3 years after the tomb was found, because Carter insisted on preserving every detail. As these objects made their way to museums and exhibitions, the world's obsession deepened. People lined up for hours just to glimpse a statue, a piece of jewelry, or the dazzling funerary mask. Tutankhamun became a symbol not just of Egypt, but of something eternal. In art, literature, and fashion, Egyptomania surged. Designers created dresses inspired by hieroglyphics. Films set in ancient tombs thrilled audiences. Writers penned tales of mummy curses and lost cities. And across Western capitals, images of the pharaoh with the golden mask appeared on posters, jewelry, and even household items. Yet underneath all this fascination, there lingered a discomfort, a silent unease about the ethics of what had been found and how it had been taken. After all, Tutankhamun had not been a museum exhibit. He had been a person, a boy who lived, ruled, died, and was buried with care and intention. His tomb was meant to be hidden forever. Its treasures were never meant to be seen by mortal eyes again. To the ancient Egyptians, death was sacred. Burial rites were not just tradition, they were spells, contracts with the divine. Breaking into a tomb was not just theft. It was disruption of the soul's journey. And so, as the Western world celebrated the unearthing of this ancient wonder, it also wrestled, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, with what it meant to disturb the dead. The curse of the pharaoh may have been a legend, but it echoed this deeper fear. Not of divine wrath, perhaps, but of moral consequence. Of the price one pays for trespassing where one does not belong. This tension shaped the way the tomb was presented. Museums took great care in displaying the artifacts with reverence. Exhibitions were staged like sacred ceremonies. Narratives emphasized the scientific and cultural value of the find, not the thrill of conquest. Still, the line between education and spectacle remained thin. In Egypt itself, the discovery triggered both pride and frustration. On one hand, it brought international recognition to the country's rich heritage. On the other, many Egyptians felt sidelined, their ancestors' legacy unearthed and paraded abroad without proper involvement or control. The question of ownership soon came to the forefront. Who truly owned Tutankhamun's legacy? The archaeologists who uncovered it? The museums that preserved it? The government that governed the land? Or the descendants of the civilization that built it? These debates continue today. Most of the tomb's treasures remain in Egypt, housed in the Cairo Museum and, more recently, in the Grand Egyptian Museum near the pyramids. But the conversation around cultural heritage, who protects it, who profits from it, and who has the right to display it, remains deeply relevant. Meanwhile, the story of Tutankhamun continues to evolve. New technologies have allowed scientists to study the artifacts and the mummy in greater detail. CT scans, DNA analysis, and infrared imaging have shed light on the pharaoh's health, lineage, and even the circumstances of his death. We now know that Tutankhamun was frail, possibly the product of royal inbreeding, and suffered from multiple diseases. His death was likely not the result of assassination or accident, but a combination of genetic disorders and infection. Yet even these modern revelations have not diminished the aura of mystery. If anything, they've made the story more human. The golden mask is now not just a symbol of eternal kingship, but of a young man burdened with divine expectations and physical frailty. He was not a great conqueror. He passed no famous laws. He fought no grand wars. And yet, because his tomb survived, his name endures louder and more vividly than those of pharaohs who ruled for decades. Perhaps this is the true lesson of the story, that in the end, what lasts is not always what we build or command, but what we preserve. What we leave behind, not in monuments or armies, but in memory. And Tutankhamun, the forgotten boy king, has become a monument in memory, a bridge between past and present, between the living and the long dead. But Egypt's mysteries don't end with one tomb. For buried beneath its sands are still thousands of years of forgotten history, waiting silently to be uncovered. And with each new discovery, the story of a civilization reborn from the desert continues to unfold. The fascination with ancient Egypt didn't start with Tutankhamun, nor did it end there. Long before Carter made his famous discovery, explorers, scholars, and adventurers had been drawn to the land of the pharaohs, a place where time seemed frozen, where sand-covered secrets whispered from beneath the surface. Egypt's monumental architecture, the pyramids of Giza, the sprawling temples of Karnak and Luxor, the colossi of Abu Simbel, had inspired awe for centuries. Even the ancient Greeks and Romans marveled at Egyptian civilization, and many of them attempted to incorporate its symbols and stories into their own cultures. By the 18th and 19th centuries, European interest in Egypt had exploded. Napoleon's invasion in 1798, though military in nature, brought with it a team of scholars and artists who meticulously documented the monuments they encountered. Their work, compiled into the monumental Description de l'Égypte, captivated European audiences and laid the groundwork for modern Egyptology. Soon after, collectors and treasure seekers followed. Museums across Europe scrambled to acquire statues, sarcophagi, papyrus scrolls, and even mummies. Tombs were emptied. Temples were dismantled. Obelisks were shipped overseas. The British Museum, the Louvre, and other institutions built entire wings dedicated to the splendor of ancient Egypt. In many cases, these artifacts were acquired legally through purchases, partnerships, or formal excavation permits. But in others, they were simply taken. The ethics of archaeology were still forming, and colonial attitudes often shaped the way ancient heritage was treated. This rush to claim Egypt's past created a paradox. On one hand, it preserved countless treasures that might otherwise have been lost to decay or looters. On the other, it removed them from their original context, physically, spiritually, and culturally. By the early 20th century, Egyptology had become a formal discipline. Scholars sought not just to collect, but to understand. They translated hieroglyphics, mapped tombs, studied architecture, and pieced together the lives of long-dead kings and queens. The decipherment of the Rosetta Stone by Jean-François Champollion in the 1820s had opened the door to Egypt's written history, and a new era of discovery had begun. Yet, despite these advancements, much of Egypt's ancient history remained a mystery. The desert was vast. Many tombs and temples were still buried. Legends of lost cities and hidden chambers persisted. And so, when Carter unearthed the tomb of a relatively unknown pharaoh and found it almost intact, the world reacted as though a prophecy had come true. The story of Tutankhamun reignited Egyptomania with new intensity. Hollywood quickly joined the frenzy. Films like The Mummy 1932 and its many successors blended horror, romance, and archaeology into thrilling narratives that played on both fascination and fear. The image of the mummy bandaged, cursed, and undead became an icon of pop culture. This cinematic obsession continued through the decades. The 1999 remake of The Mummy brought the legend to a new generation, turning ancient Egypt into a backdrop for action and spectacle. While these portrayals often played fast and loose with historical accuracy, they kept the spirit of Egypt alive in the public imagination. Meanwhile, academic work quietly progressed. Excavations continued across the country. Entire necropolises were uncovered. New technologies, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and digital mapping allowed archaeologists to explore previously inaccessible sites. In 2015, researchers proposed that hidden chambers might exist beyond the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb itself. Some speculated these could lead to the lost tomb of Nefertiti, the famous queen and possible stepmother of Tutankhamun. Scans revealed anomalies in the structure of the burial chamber, sparking international interest and debate. Although subsequent studies cast doubt on the theory, the mere possibility that further secrets lay behind the walls reignited the sense of mystery. It reminded the world that, even after a century, Tutankhamun's story might not be finished. But Egypt's past is not limited to one king, one tomb, or one era. The country is a mosaic of civilizations. From the early dynastic periods to the Ptolemaic rule, from the Greco-Roman period to the rise of Islam, Egypt has been a crossroads of history. Every layer of sand contains echoes of a different time, a different people. The allure of ancient Egypt lies not just in its age or its grandeur, but in its complexity. It was a civilization of contradictions, deeply religious, yet worldly, obsessed with death, yet vibrant with life, hierarchical, yet full of personal artistry and expression. Its monuments were built by kings, but carved by anonymous artisans whose names we will never know. Its stories were recorded in sacred texts, but also whispered by commoners in markets and fields. It was both alien and familiar, a world of gods and magic, but also of politics, ambition, love, and loss. For modern seekers, whether scholars, tourists, or casual dreamers, Egypt offers something rare, a bridge across time. To walk through the ruins of Thebes, to descend into the Valley of the Kings, to stare into the eyes of a painted sarcophagus, these are not just acts of tourism. They are encounters with the eternal. And yet, even as we reach toward the past, we must tread carefully. We are not just uncovering stones and bones. We are touching a culture that believed in the sacred, in the power of memory, and in the sanctity of rest. The story of Tutankhamun teaches us this. His tomb was not just a chamber of treasure. It was a message, a promise, a spell cast in gold and silence. And though time and man eventually opened it, the power of that promise lingers. Today, as Egypt invests in preserving its heritage and reclaiming its narrative, new museums, restoration projects, and educational programs seek to honor the past with integrity. Egyptian archaeologists now lead many of the most important digs. Exhibitions highlight local voices and context. The future of Egyptology is no longer solely in foreign hands. This shift matters, because while Tutankhamun's fame was globalized, his story is deeply Egyptian. It belongs not only to scholars or travelers, but to a people whose ancestors built the tombs, painted the walls, and whispered prayers to the gods as they sealed the dead. The global fascination will no doubt continue. Films will be made. Books will be written. The Boy King's face will appear on souvenirs, t-shirts, and social media. But beneath all that, beneath the layers of myth, marketing, and mystery, lies a real story. A story about a young man, a forgotten tomb, and the moment when the modern world rediscovered the ancient. And in that rediscovery, we found not just treasure, but something far more lasting. A sense of connection, of wonder, of humility before time itself. So the sands of Egypt remain restless, shifting with wind and time. New secrets wait below. And as long as there are those who seek with reverence and care, the land of the pharaohs will keep offering its stories, one grain at a time. While the story of Tutankhamun often focuses on the tomb and its treasure, there's another dimension that deserves just as much attention: the artistry behind it all. Because the objects buried with the Boy King weren't just luxurious possessions. They were works of sacred craftsmanship, imbued with meaning and designed for eternity. Ancient Egyptian art was not created for beauty alone. Every symbol, material, and motif served a purpose: spiritual, symbolic, or ritualistic. And nowhere is this more evident than in the treasures found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Take the famous golden mask, for example. Shaped to fit the young king's face, its smooth, almost serene expression exudes calm authority. It's crafted from solid gold and inlaid with semi-precious stones: lapis lazuli, carnelian, obsidian, quartz. Every line of the mask, every curve of the eyebrow, every colored stripe in the headdress was made not for display, but for divine protection. The mask's function was to preserve the pharaoh's identity in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul, composed of several parts including the Ka and Ba, needed to recognize its body in order to be reborn. The mask was more than a portrait. It was a spiritual anchor. But the mask was only one of over 5,000 artifacts in the tomb. Each object told its own story. There were thrones, decorated with scenes of domestic intimacy between the king and his queen, Ankhesenamun. One golden throne shows her anointing him with oil, a rare depiction of affection in ancient royal art. The throne's backrest is covered with vibrant imagery: the Aten shining down, lotus flowers in bloom, and protective symbols all around. It's not just a seat. It's a message of love, legitimacy, and divine favor. There were chariots, disassembled and stacked neatly along the walls. Though Tutankhamun may not have used them in battle, given his physical limitations, they represented royal strength and mobility in the afterlife. Some were ceremonial, others more practical. All were beautifully constructed, with gold and ivory inlays, leather fittings, and intricate detailing. Canopic jars held his internal organs, each protected by a goddess. These jars were not only storage containers, they were magical guardians. The alabaster chest in which they sat was carved with stunning precision, its corners adorned with figures of Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Selkut, their arms outstretched in eternal vigilance. Weapons, daggers, bows, and arrows were also present. One dagger, famously, was made from meteoric iron, a material rarer and more symbolic than gold itself. The blade shines with otherworldly sheen, a gift quite literally from the heavens. To the Egyptians, this was no coincidence. Objects made from celestial metal were believed to carry divine energy. Furniture filled the chambers, beds shaped like sacred animals, boxes painted with scenes of daily life and warfare, stools with delicately curved legs, footrests bearing images of enemies beneath the king's feet. Even mundane items like sandals, combs, and linens were there, practical tools for eternity. Musical instruments, board games, jars of wine, baskets of food, cosmetics, and perfumes. Every element of comfort and ritual was represented. Nothing was left to chance. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was a continuation of earthly life, and a king must be prepared to rule again, to feast again, to live again. What's remarkable is the level of craftsmanship across all these objects. The artisans who made them were masters of their trades. Metal workers, carpenters, stone cutters, painters, weavers. Many worked in Deir el-Medina, the village of laborers and artists near the Valley of the Kings, where generations of families dedicated their lives to crafting tombs for eternity. These artisans were highly respected. They were literate, well-fed, and sometimes even buried with honors. Their work was guided by ritual manuals and overseen by priests. Each tool, each stroke of paint, followed traditions that dated back centuries. They were not just creating things, they were participating in a sacred process. The art itself followed strict conventions. Egyptian artists weren't aiming for realism in the modern sense. Instead, they used stylized forms and symbolic proportions to convey meaning. A pharaoh might be shown as larger than surrounding figures, not because he physically was, but because he held greater importance. Color, too, had deep significance. Red symbolized life and chaos. Green represented fertility and rebirth. Gold was the flesh of the gods, eternal and unchanging. Blue was the color of the heavens and divinity. Nothing was arbitrary, and yet, within these conventions, there was room for creativity. Some of the artifacts in Tutankhamun's tomb display innovative design, playful composition, or subtle humor. One box lid, for example, shows the king as a sphinx trampling enemies, a typical motif, but his facial features are delicately individualized, suggesting it was crafted with care for his unique image. It's this blend of order and artistry that makes Egyptian craftsmanship so compelling. It speaks to a culture that valued structure but also found joy in beauty. A civilization that honored the eternal but still embraced the personal. Modern researchers continue to study these artifacts with fresh eyes. Advances in imaging and conservation have revealed new layers of detail. Traces of pigments invisible to the naked eye, fingerprints of artisans embedded in gold, even remnants of ancient adhesives. These discoveries deepen our appreciation for the precision and sophistication of the work. At the same time, they raise questions. Why was so much effort devoted to a tomb for a relatively minor king? Was it guilt over his sudden death? A political strategy to reinforce dynastic legitimacy? Or simply the last remnants of a tradition that would soon fade? After all, Tutankhamun died at the end of a dynasty in decline. His successors faced internal strife and foreign threats. Within a few generations, Egypt's golden age would end. The great tombs would cease. Simpler burials would follow. The valley would fall silent. And yet, in that final burst of glory, the artisans of Egypt created a masterpiece of funerary art. One that would survive fire, flood, theft, and time. A snapshot of belief, devotion, and skill preserved for the world to rediscover. Perhaps that is why Tutankhamun's tomb matters so much. Not just because of the boy who was buried there, but because of the thousands of hands and minds that shaped his passage to the afterlife. It is their legacy, as much as his, that we remember. Their chisels, their brushes, their prayers, their eternity carved in gold. The story of Tutankhamun and his tomb has shaped more than just the field of archaeology. It has fundamentally influenced the way the modern world views ancient civilizations, cultural heritage, and the role of history in shaping identity. Before Carter's discovery, ancient Egypt was already revered as one of the great cradles of human civilization. Its pyramids and temples stood as proof of architectural genius, its art and writing the subject of scholarly awe. But to the general public, the civilization remained distant, a land of myth, mummies, and mystery. The tomb of Tutankhamun changed that. It made Egyptology accessible. Suddenly, this wasn't just about kings and timelines. It was about a real person, buried with toys and sandals and golden chariots. It was about beauty, belief, and the strange closeness of the ancient past. For Egypt itself, the discovery became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it sparked enormous global attention. Tourists poured into the country. Funding for archaeology surged. Egyptian culture was showcased to the world. On the other hand, many of the narratives were shaped by outsiders, Europeans and Americans, who spoke about Egypt, interpreted its past, and sometimes even claimed ownership over its treasures. The early 20th century was still deeply colonial. Egypt was technically independent by the time the tomb was discovered, but British influence remained strong. Many Egyptians watched as foreign archaeologists removed artifacts, published books, and gave lectures around the world, often without local collaboration or credit. This imbalance led to growing calls for Egypt to reclaim its narrative. Over time, Egyptian archaeologists, scholars, and institutions have stepped into more central roles. Today, figures like Dr. Zahi Hawass have become global ambassadors for Egyptian heritage, insisting that Egyptians themselves should be the custodians and storytellers of their own history. These efforts have had real consequences. In recent decades, Egypt has secured the return of stolen or illegally exported artifacts. Major museums around the world now face increasing scrutiny about the origins of their collections. International protocols have been strengthened to prevent illicit antiquities trading. The Grand Egyptian Museum, a monumental new facility near the pyramids of Giza, represents this new chapter. Built to house the full Tutankhamun collection alongside thousands of other artifacts. It's a symbol of national pride and cultural leadership, It aims to tell Egypt's story not just to the world, but to its own people. For many Egyptians, this reclamation is personal. The tomb of Tutankhamun isn't just a tourist attraction or historical footnote. It's part of a living legacy, a connection to ancestors, identity, and a culture that has endured for millennia. And for the wider world, the Boy King's story reminds us that history is never static. It is interpreted, reinterpreted, and reframed through the lens of the present. Each generation rediscovers Tutankhamun in its own way, as a victim of royal politics, a symbol of golden splendor, a catalyst for change. Modern education has played a key role in this evolving perspective. Textbooks, documentaries, and digital platforms now present Tutankhamun's story with greater nuance. They highlight not only the discovery, but the ethical questions it raised. They explore both the magnificence of the artifacts and the human realities behind them. New research continues to add layers. Genetic analysis has mapped the royal lineage, linking Tutankhamun to earlier pharaohs and confirming complex family ties. High-resolution scans have revealed how some items in the tomb were reused, repurposed, or hurriedly assembled. Even the burial itself, once seen as perfect, is now understood as rushed, flawed, yet still magnificent. In this way, Tutankhamun's legacy has shifted from myth to man. We see him now not as a golden god, but as a teenager caught in the web of history, shaped by his family, his fragile body, his brief reign, and the rituals of a dying dynasty. And that, perhaps, is his true power. In a world saturated with spectacle, his story cuts through the noise. It offers something real, a glimpse into the vulnerability of kingship, the endurance of tradition, and the human desire to be remembered. Artists continue to find inspiration in his legacy. Writers weave tales from his time. Designers borrow the motifs of his mask, his jewelry, his royal insignia. The lines between history, memory, and imagination blur. And that's part of the magic. There's a reason why, even a century after the tomb's opening, exhibitions of his artifacts still draw massive crowds. Why children in schools learn his name before they know any other pharaoh. Why his face, calm, gold, and timeless, remains one of the most recognized in the world. It is not just the treasure. It is the story of discovery. How a man spent decades chasing a rumor through dust and stone, and finally found glory. The story of preservation. How thousands of fragile objects survived against the odds, buried beneath rubble and time. The story of reinterpretation. How each age, colonial, modern, digital, found new meanings in an old tomb. And the story of reclamation. How a nation, long defined by others, is now reclaiming its voice, its past, and its future. In this way, Tutankhamun represents more than just a king. He stands at the crossroads of past and present, of power and fragility, of memory and myth. He reminds us that history is not a straight line. It is a spiral, always circling back, always inviting us to look again, with fresh eyes, deeper questions, and greater care. So the next time you see his mask, whether in a book or a museum or on a glowing screen, take a moment. Look past the gold, past the fame. See the person, the people, the time, the silence. Because behind every treasure lies a truth. And behind every truth, a story waiting to be told again. In many ways, the legacy of Tutankhamun is not simply about what was found, but about what it sparked in science, in art, in ethics, and in the collective human imagination. His story continues to evolve, even a century after its most dramatic chapter began. One of the most fascinating developments in recent years has been the integration of cutting-edge technology into Egyptology. Archaeologists now rely not just on shovels and brushes, but on drones, 3D scanning, geophysical sensors, and artificial intelligence. These tools have transformed the way we explore, analyze, and understand ancient sites. Tutankhamun's tomb, though thoroughly excavated, continues to yield insights through digital reconstruction. Every object has been photographed, measured, and scanned in microscopic detail. Researchers have created virtual models of the burial chamber, enabling scholars and the public alike to walk through the tomb from anywhere in the world. This level of access changes the game. It democratizes archaeology, making one of the most important discoveries in history available to students, historians, and curious minds across the globe. With a few clicks, anyone can zoom into the engravings on a throne, examine the texture of a funerary bed, or study the inscriptions on a ritual object. More importantly, these digital records help protect the fragile originals. Artifacts are vulnerable to time, environment, and even light. By documenting them in high resolution, we preserve their details for future generations, even if the physical pieces someday deteriorate. Technology also plays a crucial role in conservation. Advanced climate control systems, non-invasive cleaning techniques, and laser scanning help museums maintain optimal conditions for ancient objects. Restoration teams now use microscopic tools, computer modeling, and even forensic methods to stabilize delicate materials without altering their integrity. One particularly exciting breakthrough has come from DNA analysis. In the past 2 decades, scientists have extracted genetic material from royal mummies, including Tutankhamun's. By comparing DNA from different remains, researchers have mapped out the 18th dynasty's family tree with unprecedented clarity. The results confirmed that Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten, the controversial pharaoh who introduced monotheism. His mother, it turns out, was also Akhenaten's sister, a common practice among royals to preserve the divine bloodline, but one that came with serious genetic consequences. These findings provide context for Tutankhamun's health issues: his clubfoot, cleft palate, possible epilepsy, and compromised immune system. Far from being a robust young king, he was likely a sickly teenager, burdened not only by the weight of the crown but by his own failing body. These medical realities add depth to his story. They humanize him. Behind the gold and legend was a boy shaped by fragile biology, political chaos, and religious upheaval. He may not have chosen his fate, but he lived it and died with the weight of dynastic expectation on his shoulders. Another layer of mystery lies in his burial itself. Scholars now believe that the tomb was not originally built for him. Its orientation and layout differ from other pharaonic burials. The sudden nature of his death likely forced the royal court to improvise, selecting an available tomb, repurposing artifacts, and completing the burial in haste. Forensic studies of the mummy also reveal oddities. The body shows signs of having been badly burned, possibly due to a chemical reaction between the embalming materials and the tomb environment. His remains were brittle and fragmented when first unwrapped, so damaged that early interpretations mistook the distortion for signs of violence or trauma. Modern analysis has debunked many of these myths. Tutankhamun was likely not murdered, nor did he suffer a dramatic accident. He may have died from complications due to malaria, a broken leg, or other underlying health conditions. The evidence points to a tragic but natural death, sudden, unglamorous, and poorly managed in its aftermath. And yet, even this reality is powerful. It strips away the myth and reveals something more enduring: the vulnerability of humanity. Even the most divine kings were not immune to disease, accident, or time. Tutankhamun's story has also become a case study in how historical narratives are built. Early reports sensationalized the treasure and curse, often ignoring the broader cultural context. But as scholarship advanced, the focus shifted from spectacle to substance, from gold to governance, from mystery to meaning. This evolution reflects a larger trend in archaeology, a move away from treasure hunting toward ethical, community-based, and scientifically rigorous exploration. Archaeology today is as much about people as it is about artifacts, about understanding lives, not just cataloging objects. And Tutankhamun, once considered a minor footnote in Egyptian history, has become a symbol of that transformation. His tomb launched Egyptology into the modern age, challenged assumptions, and forced scholars to reconcile myth with evidence. In schools, he remains a captivating figure, the gateway through which millions first encounter the ancient world. His story teaches critical thinking, how to separate myth from fact, how to interpret the past responsibly, and how to value preservation over possession. In museums, his artifacts continue to draw crowds, but curators now tell fuller stories of artisans, rituals, belief systems, and the broader political landscape of 14th century BCE Egypt. And in the media, his image still sells, but it is increasingly accompanied by nuance, accuracy, and respect. Documentaries now include Egyptian voices. Books explore not just what was found, but how it was found and at what cost. As we enter the 2nd century since Carter's discovery, we carry forward both the excitement and the responsibility. Tutankhamun is no longer just a figure of fascination. He is a cultural touchstone, a reminder of the past's complexity, and a mirror to our present values. His legacy challenges us to think deeply about memory, ownership, and the ethics of excavation. It reminds us that history is not simply what happened, it's how we choose to tell it. And above all, it teaches us that even the quietest voices, a young king with no great victories, a tomb almost overlooked, a life cut short, can echo through time more powerfully than we ever imagined. Because sometimes the smallest stories leave the largest imprint. And in the stillness of a sealed chamber, beneath stone and silence, the soul of a civilization still speaks, in gold, in dust, in truth. As we reflect on Tutankhamun's legacy, it becomes clear that his enduring impact lies not only in what was left behind, but in what continues to be uncovered, in the minds he has inspired, the questions he has raised, and the global conversations he continues to spark. Every era that rediscovers Tutankhamun seems to find something different in him. In the 1920s, He was a beacon of mystery and magic, a golden antidote to a world bruised by war. In the post-war decades, he became a symbol of adventure, of hidden treasure and exotic wonder. Today, he represents something more nuanced, a chance to examine our relationship with the past and to ask how we preserve, study, and share the world's oldest stories. The Boy King has become a litmus test for our cultural priorities. His fame invites us to consider why we are drawn to some histories more than others. Why does the world remember Tutankhamun more than Ramesses the Great or Hatshepsut the Builder? Why has his image traveled further, lasted longer, echoed louder? Part of the answer lies in timing. His tomb was found at a moment of global cultural hunger, for beauty, for certainty, for myth. But part of it lies in narrative. Tutankhamun's story, short life, mysterious death, sudden rediscovery, is irresistibly cinematic. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Protagonist, antagonists, secrets, twists, even curses. It's history with the rhythm of a legend. And in a world dominated by stories, that rhythm matters. People remember stories that move them, stories they can feel. Tutankhamun's tale is one of loss and rediscovery, of splendor and fragility. It resonates across borders and generations. That emotional resonance has made the Boy King more than a historical figure. He is an icon, a metaphor, a touchstone. He stands for ancient glory, for buried truth, for the idea that even the smallest voice can echo for eternity. His impact can be seen in disciplines far beyond Egyptology. In art, his mask has inspired sculpture, painting, jewelry, and fashion. In music, lyrics and albums have drawn on his name and image. In literature, he has appeared in novels, poetry, and fantasy. In video games and virtual reality, his tomb is recreated, reimagined, and explored. He has become a reference point, a shorthand for ancient mystery, eternal youth, and hidden power. That power is not just in the gold, but in what it means, the desire to connect, to remember, to understand. And yet, amid all this symbolism, the real Tutankhamun still exists, not in metaphor, but in fact. His remains, his belongings, his legacy of clay, metal, and stone. That reality must be protected, because for every poetic image or pop culture nod, there is a responsibility to the truth behind it. Preservation is more than conservation. It is context. It is respect. It is teaching future generations not just what was found, but how and why it matters. Museums and educators have a role to play in balancing the awe of discovery with the humility of stewardship. We must also recognize that Egypt's history does not belong solely to the world. It belongs first and foremost to its people. The resurgence of Egyptian-led archaeology, museum leadership, and public education initiatives reflects a powerful shift from external fascination to internal ownership. This reclaiming of narrative is not about exclusion. It's about balance. Collaboration between international experts and local custodians is vital to ensuring that heritage is protected and meaningfully interpreted. It's about listening as much as excavating, honoring as much as studying. Tutankhamun, in this way, becomes a symbol of what shared history can look like, not taken, but told together. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the challenges facing heritage preservation grow more complex. Climate change threatens ancient structures. Looting and black market trading remain real risks. Political instability can endanger archaeological sites and institutions. And digital misinformation, fake relics, sensational headlines, distorted histories, adds another layer of complexity. But there is also hope. Technology continues to offer new tools for protection and education. Satellite imaging can detect looting in real time. Blockchain can authenticate artifact provenance. Augmented reality can bring exhibits to life for students across the globe. Every challenge is met with innovation and often with global cooperation. Tutankhamun's story reminds us what is at stake. His tomb was nearly lost to history, his name almost forgotten. It was only through persistence, care, and a bit of luck that we rediscovered him at all. That rediscovery sparked a century of fascination and responsibility. It showed what we stand to gain when we invest in uncovering our past. Not just treasure, but knowledge. Not just knowledge, but connection to each other, to time, to something bigger than ourselves. It also reminds us of fragility. His tomb, sealed for millennia, was disrupted in an instant. Even with the best intentions, human hands can damage what they seek to protect. This is why the ethics of exploration matter as much as the techniques. Why questions of should we are just as important as can we. In recent years, these questions have become more urgent. Who gets to tell the story of ancient cultures? Who benefits from the display and study of their treasures? How do we ensure that the desire to learn does not become a justification for exploitation? Tutankhamun offers no easy answers, but his story creates space to ask them. It invites reflection, not just wonder, dialogue, not just display. In that way, he continues to shape the future of archaeology and heritage. Perhaps this is the final paradox. The most famous king of ancient Egypt was neither powerful nor long-lived. He left behind no grand monuments, no famous battles, no sweeping reforms. Yet he became the eternal face of a civilization. Not because of what he did, but because of what we found. And because we found it, we have a chance, a responsibility to do better with the stories we tell next. In the sands of the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of Tutankhamun still rests. Its treasures have been removed, its mysteries largely revealed. But its echo remains, a whisper in gold, a question in silence, and the eternal presence of a boy who, in death, gave new life to the past. Hope and fragility, of fame built on silence, of a forgotten king whose name now lives in the hearts of millions. And because of that, Tutankhamun continues to be rediscovered, not just in sands and museums, but in the spaces between memory and meaning. His legacy has even influenced the way nations approach their own pasts. Across the globe, countries are reevaluating how they tell their histories, how they curate artifacts, how they acknowledge the voices that were once erased. The question is no longer just what happened, but who gets to tell the story? In this context, Tutankhamun has become a symbol of cultural awakening. His tomb's global fame highlighted uncomfortable truths: the imbalance of power in archaeology, the colonial roots of museum collections, the unequal flow of cultural capital. The shiny gold mask didn't just reflect the boy's face. It reflected the gaze of the world that claimed to discover him. But that gaze is now shifting. In Egypt, local archaeologists lead major projects. Egyptian universities offer robust programs in heritage management. There's growing investment in training, preservation, and education, not just to serve tourism, but to reclaim the past with dignity. Young Egyptians today grow up knowing that their history is not just ancient but alive. The narratives are no longer imported, but cultivated at home. They see Tutankhamun not as a mystical figure from afar, but as part of a continuing cultural lineage, a distant ancestor who, through chance and history, speaks again. This reclamation is also reshaping the international stage. Calls for artifact repatriation have gained momentum. The British Museum, the Louvre, and other global institutions face renewed scrutiny. Some have responded by returning items. Others have formed collaborative exhibitions that include local curators, historical context, and shared ownership of narrative. Tutankhamun's story is central to this discussion. His treasures, though mostly housed in Egypt, have toured the world, often with mixed implications. On one hand, they generate awe and cultural curiosity. On the other, they raise ethical concerns. Who benefits? Who decides what is shown? What meanings are emphasized? These aren't easy questions, but they are necessary ones. And in asking them, we treat the past not as property, but as inheritance, something to be honored, shared, and understood. There's also a personal side to the Tutankhamun story that continues to resonate. The idea that greatness can come from unexpected places, that a young ruler, once forgotten, can shape centuries of imagination, that quiet lives can echo loudest. It's a message that transcends geography and language, rooted in something deeply human. This is perhaps why his story continues to adapt so fluidly across media. In classrooms, he inspires lessons not only in history, but in science, ethics, and storytelling. In films and novels, he remains a muse, a mystery, a mirror, a metaphor. In fashion and design, his aesthetic lives on, connecting contemporary creativity with timeless patterns. Even in politics and diplomacy, his legacy has left a mark. Tutankhamun has been the face of cultural exchange agreements, touring exhibitions, and state-level partnerships. His artifacts have traveled as ambassadors, reminding audiences from Paris to Tokyo to Los Angeles of our shared human heritage. And yet, despite all this visibility, the tomb itself remains a quiet place, nestled in the Valley of the Kings, carved into the desert rock, where the silence feels sacred. For all the noise surrounding his name, the physical site speaks in whispers, of careful burials, of long-forgotten prayers, of a civilization's deep reverence for the afterlife. That tension between spectacle and stillness defines the legacy of Tutankhamun. He is both the glittering mask and the frail mummy, the public icon and the private memory. His tomb is both a global attraction and a personal space of mourning, reflection, and ritual. For archaeologists, that space holds lessons, not just about what to find, but how to find it. Not just about what we uncover, but how we interpret it. Every tomb, every statue, every cracked vessel is part of a larger human story, one shaped as much by those who lived it as by those who now study it. And so the work continues, Excavations expand. New sites are surveyed. Technologies evolve. But the principles remain: respect, curiosity, patience. The story of Tutankhamun reminds us that the greatest discoveries often come not from grand gestures, but from careful listening. Listening to the land, to history, to silence, because buried in the quiet of the past are voices waiting, not to be owned, but to be heard. And as long as we approach that silence with humility, with wonder, and with a readiness to understand Tutankhamun's voice, and the voices of all who lived before us, will never be lost. As the centenary of Tutankhamun's tomb discovery passed, the world reflected not only on the glitter of the find but on its deeper meanings, the legacy it has shaped, the paths it opened, and the questions it still dares to ask. For historians and archaeologists, the past 100 years have marked a transformation in how we engage with ancient civilizations. When Carter and his team broke the seals of the burial chamber in 1922, archaeology was still evolving. Documentation was improving, but many techniques were invasive or experimental by today's standards. Cultural sensitivity was limited, and the role of local voices often marginalized. Yet, in the century that followed, Tutankhamun has become both subject and catalyst for more responsible methods. His tomb prompted the refinement of conservation strategies, the use of climate control, chemical stabilization, and non-invasive diagnostics. His artifacts were among the first to be transported under tight environmental monitoring. The way his body was handled sparked ethical debates that shaped modern standards for dealing with human remains. As a result, every major archaeological project today bears traces of his legacy. Teams now include experts from multiple fields, from paleopathologists and textile conservators to historians of religion and digital modelers. Multidisciplinary cooperation, once rare, is now the gold standard. But beyond academic practice, Tutankhamun continues to live in the realm of public culture. He appears in museums, on stamps, in documentaries, mobile apps, virtual tours, and even video games. His story is told in dozens of languages, reaching billions of people, each of whom finds something personal in it. To school children, he is a mysterious king from a golden age. To artists, he is an endless source of aesthetic and conceptual inspiration. To Egypt, he is a national icon, a reminder of ancestral brilliance and a testament to resilience. Even spiritually, he occupies a unique space. For some, the tomb represents not just the burial of a king, but the enduring power of ritual, belief, and sacred design. The wall paintings in his chamber, though limited compared to other tombs, are filled with symbolic meaning. Osiris welcoming the soul, Anubis overseeing embalming, protective spells guarding each threshold. The Book of the Dead was not merely a text. It was a map for the soul's journey. And Tutankhamun, though young, was sent into eternity with every provision his people could muster, despite the constraints of his unexpected passing. That blend of urgency and reverence is still palpable when standing in the small, silent chamber today. But perhaps the greatest testament to Tutankhamun's legacy is not what he left behind, but what we've learned to do because of him. We've learned to see the past not as a trophy, but as a trust. We've learned to collaborate across borders, languages, and disciplines. We've learned to listen to the dead, not in a supernatural sense, but in a historical one. Their voices live in clay shards, in pigments, in fibers and ink. When we handle them with care, they speak clearly. We've also begun to reckon with the power of narrative. Carter's original diaries, now preserved in archives, show a mix of wonder and burden. The thrill of discovery shadowed by the pressure of publicity and the chaos of logistics. In recent years, scholars have re-examined those writings to understand not just what happened, but how it was framed. The legend of the Pharaoh's curse, though largely media fabrication, revealed how powerfully myth can hijack fact. Lord Carnarvon's death, followed by a string of unrelated misfortunes, was transformed into a supernatural saga. This narrative sold newspapers, but it also distorted the nature of the find. Today, responsible storytelling aims to counter such sensationalism, not by stripping the story of mystery, but by grounding the mystery in context and care. In doing so, we not only honor Tutankhamun, we honor the thousands of unnamed Egyptians who made his tomb possible. The workers who cut the limestone, the painters who lined the walls, the weavers who prepared linen wrappings, the priests who spoke incantations in the torchlit chamber. Their lives too matter, and their legacy is as present in the tomb as the gold and alabaster. That's why exhibitions now seek balance. They showcase not just the king's splendor, but the society around him. They speak of craftsmanship, community, and cultural continuity. They explore what it meant to live, die, and be remembered in ancient Egypt, and how those meanings evolve over time. Digital platforms have expanded that mission. Virtual tours of the tomb and 3D renderings of artifacts allow millions to engage with the material without setting foot in a gallery. And while nothing replaces the intimacy of physical presence, these tools widen access, diversify audiences, and preserve fragile heritage from overexposure. Egypt itself is also reimagining how it shares its past. The opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum marks a new chapter, a space where Tutankhamun's full collection can be housed together for the first time. With over 100,000 artifacts, the museum is poised not only to celebrate Egypt's history, but to shape the future of global heritage stewardship. Here, Tutankhamun's treasures won't just be displayed, they'll be contextualized. Visitors will encounter not just the artifacts, but the landscape, politics, religion, and people that made them possible. It's a museum not just of things, but of meaning. And so, the boy king remains a teacher. He teaches us patience, the years it took Carter to find him, and the years it took us to understand him. He teaches us humility, that behind every monument lies a web of human effort, and that no story is truly singular. He teaches us wonder, that even in a world saturated with information, the past still holds surprises. And above all, he teaches us continuity, the idea that history is not behind us, but with us. Not frozen in time, but alive in thought, in memory, in responsibility. Tutankhamun may have ruled for less than a decade, and he may have lived in the shadow of more powerful pharaohs, but in death, in rediscovery, he transcended all boundaries. And in doing so, he became more than a king. He became a conversation, one that we are still having and must keep having, as long as the sands of time whisper secrets, and we are willing to listen. There's something deeply and universally human about the way we return, generation after generation, to the story of Tutankhamun. His tale continues to resonate not just because of the golden artifacts or the drama of discovery, but because it reflects timeless truths about power, legacy, and the silent longing to be remembered. Tutankhamun was, at the core, a child. A teenage boy thrust onto the throne of the most powerful civilization of his time. We don't know what ambitions flickered in his young mind, what dreams he nursed under starlit skies, or how he truly felt carrying the weight of a divine title at such a tender age. But this very absence of clarity draws us closer to him, inviting us to imagine, to fill in the blanks with fragments of our own humanity. His face, immortalized in that luminous gold mask, exudes serenity and strength. Yet behind that calm facade lie the remains of a fragile body, a clubfoot, weak bones, evidence of illness and pain. It is this tension between the ideal and the real that makes Tutankhamun not just a figure of history, but a symbol of human paradox, the struggle between how we are remembered and who we really were. This is why his story transcends geography and time. He is not merely an Egyptian pharaoh, he has become a global symbol, standing for the eternal themes of life and death, youth and mortality, remembrance and forgetting. And in doing so, he bridges the gap between ancient and modern, between a long-buried tomb and the bustling curiosity of today's world. Ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead was to keep their soul alive. If that is true, then Tutankhamun is more alive today than he ever was in his brief reign. His name is etched into textbooks, whispered in classrooms, broadcast in documentaries, and immortalized in digital space. He lives not just in artifacts, but in imaginations across continents, across generations. But this global fame also demands responsibility. The way we tell his story shapes how the world sees Egypt, how the past is interpreted, and how we understand ourselves. Early retellings focused on spectacle, the glittering tomb, the so-called curse, the melodrama of discovery. They fed Western fascination while often sidelining Egyptian voices and cultural context. Today, we have an opportunity to reshape that narrative, to replace myth with meaning, sensation with substance. To ask deeper questions: who built these tombs? Who painted these walls? Who wept at the boy king's death? Who ensured his journey to the afterlife would be honored despite the political turbulence that surrounded him? In re-examining Tutankhamun, we are also examining ourselves, our motivations, our ethics, our blind spots. How do we balance it with accuracy? How do we celebrate discovery without falling into exploitation? How do we ensure that those whose ancestors crafted these wonders are the ones empowered to tell their stories? This reflection is not academic, it's personal, cultural, and global. Tutankhamun's legacy reminds us that the past is not inert. It is active. It breathes through the stories we tell, the choices we make, the values we uphold. And it compels us to ask, what kind of ancestors will we become? The tomb itself, though modest in size compared to others in the Valley of the Kings, has become a temple of memory. A place where silence reigns not as absence, but as reverence. Stepping inside, one is enveloped by an atmosphere thick with time. You can almost feel the brush strokes of the artisans, hear the murmur of ancient prayers, sense the stillness that watched over him for more than 3,000 years. For many modern visitors, that moment is transformative. They enter expecting to see gold and leave having felt something far deeper, a connection to the continuum of life and legacy. A reminder that beneath the jewels and symbolism was a person, imperfect, mortal, human. And therein lies the universal appeal. In Tutankhamun, we see ourselves. The yearning to matter. The desire to be understood. The hope that even after we're gone, someone might look back and say this life had meaning. His story has also prompted conversations far beyond Egypt about cultural ownership, repatriation, and representation. Museums across the world are being called upon to reevaluate how they present history. Not just what they show, but how they show it. Not just what they preserve, but whose perspective they prioritize. Tutankhamun is central to that reckoning. His fame carries weight, and with it, the potential to set new standards. Exhibitions now place greater emphasis on Egyptian voices, historical nuance, and the lived realities behind the artifacts. Tour guides no longer recite rehearsed lines, but engage in dialogue. Films and books increasingly highlight the broader ecosystem, the priests, artists, and laborers who made royal burial possible. Technology has also deepened our relationship with his legacy. Through virtual reality, high-resolution scans, and AI-driven restoration, we can explore the tomb without harming it. We can see the mask up close, trace the patterns on ceremonial beds, study the inscriptions on jars that once held his organs. These tools not only preserve the past, they democratize it. And yet, amidst all this innovation, the essence of Tutankhamun's story remains hauntingly simple: a young life cut short. A legacy preserved by ritual and chance. A rediscovery that changed the world. We carry his memory not because he built great monuments or led mighty armies, but because he reminds us of something quieter, that even the seemingly insignificant can become immortal when seen with care. In that sense, Tutankhamun's afterlife is still unfolding. Not in temples or tombs, but in the questions we continue to ask. In the reverence we show to what was buried. In the wisdom we carry forward from what was uncovered. He is not finished speaking, and we are not done listening. Because his story is now our story too, a golden thread stitched into the vast fabric of human history. Fragile, precious, eternal. And so we come to the end of the story, or perhaps to its newest beginning. For though the tomb of Tutankhamun was opened more than a century ago, its echoes have never faded. They reverberate still, across deserts and continents, across the scrolls of academia and the screens of our daily lives. The boy king lies no longer in silence. His voice, once thought buried beneath dust and centuries, now speaks louder than ever, not in commands or proclamations, but in the subtle tones of memory, wonder, and legacy. His rediscovery was not merely about gold or glory, but about how the past refuses to remain forgotten. About how sometimes the smallest door in the valley leads to the largest conversation across time. Tutankhamun's life was brief, but his story became vast. He did not lead great wars or erect colossal monuments, but he left behind something even more enduring, a reason for the world to remember, to question, to learn. That's the true magic of his legacy. The way it compels us to lean closer, to wonder who he was, to wonder who we are. How history can start with a sealed doorway and end with millions of open minds. There is poetry in that. In the way a young pharaoh, whose tomb was almost lost forever, has become a timeless thread binding cultures, generations, and disciplines together. He unites archaeologists and artists, historians and dreamers, tourists and teachers. Each sees something different in him, and each brings that vision into the light. In this way, Tutankhamun continues to be discovered, not in the shifting sands of the Valley of the Kings, but in the shifting sands of human thought. Each age interprets him anew. Each generation rewrites his relevance. In the 1920s, he symbolized exotic wonder. In the 1960s, he became a global icon of mystery. Today, he is a symbol of heritage, ethics, and global memory. And tomorrow? He will be something else again, a reflection of whatever questions the future dares to ask. This is the power of legacy. Not to remain frozen in time, but to evolve, to invite dialogue, to ignite curiosity, to remain open to meaning. Tutankhamun is not just an object of study, but a partner in inquiry. His tomb does not only teach, it listens. It responds to how we change, and it reminds us that history is alive as long as we are willing to hear it. For Egypt, the journey continues. New tombs await discovery. New generations of scholars rise with purpose. The Grand Egyptian Museum opens its doors not only to artifacts, but to hope. Hope that the narrative will be told with balance, dignity, and truth. And for the rest of us, wherever we may be, Tutankhamun is an invitation to pause, to look closer, to feel the thread of time not as something that separates us from the past, but as something that connects us. To realize that even the youngest pharaoh, even the faintest memory, can shape the world if we let it. Perhaps the most powerful part of the story is not its ending, but that it doesn't truly end. The tomb was opened, yes. The treasures cataloged, the mummy examined, the world enchanted. But the meaning continues. The mystery deepens. The conversation expands. And it always will, as long as we seek knowledge. As long as we honor the dignity of those who came before. As long as we believe that every story, no matter how small, deserves to be told with care. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into dreams, remember that beneath the earth, beneath history, beneath the sands, there once lay a boy. A boy with a crown of gold and a heart still full of unanswered questions. A boy whose voice now rides the winds of time, whispering gently to us all. Not demanding, but asking. Will you listen? Will you remember? Will you carry the light forward? For in the quiet chambers of history, beneath vaults of stone and silence, the human spirit waits, not to be worshipped, but to be understood. And in Tutankhamun, that spirit endures. Not as myth, not as magic, but as memory, golden, fragile, eternal.